I am about to tell you the most absolutely insane story of family drama you have ever heard. Forget reality TV. This is on a whole other level. We are talking about a father, an emperor, who did something completely unthinkable to his own son. And he didn't use a sword. He didn't use poison. He used something you probably have in your kitchen cabinet right now. Picture this. You're in the biggest, most famous city in the world, Constantinople. But the year is 1379. The city is struggling. The government is flat broke. And inside the most luxurious palace you've ever seen, a father is preparing to permanently disfigure his own son, his own flesh and blood. Why? To keep his job. This wasn't some random bad guy. This was the emperor. And he decided the only way to secure his power was to make sure his son could never, ever see again. In this video, we're going to break down how this one single horrific choice, this unbelievable act of cruelty, pushed one of the greatest empires in history one step closer to complete annihilation. You are not going to believe how this plays out. All right, so first up, let's meet our main character, Andronikos. This guy was literally born with a golden spoon in his mouth. I mean, he was the eldest son of the Emperor, John V. He grew up in unimaginable luxury. Think silk clothes, massive palaces, servants for everything. While his dad was being praised by priests as the 13th apostle, this kid was being told by everyone that he was destined for greatness, that he already had the look of an emperor. He had the special purple boots, which in Byzantine times was like having the most exclusive, limited edition sneakers in the world. He had the famous family nose, the Palaiologos nose. And more importantly, he had this absolute, unshakable belief that the crown was coming to him no matter what. It was his birthright. He didn't have to earn it. It was just his. But here's the twist, and it is a huge one. The empire was a complete mess. It was basically bankrupt. Imagine being the CEO of a legendary company like Apple or Google, but you have no money, your offices are falling apart, and your company has shrunk to just a few buildings. That was the situation. The Byzantine Empire was just a tiny patch of land around the capital city, and they were paying their biggest enemies, the Ottoman Turks, protection money, just so they wouldn't tear down the walls. So you have the father, Emperor John V, working 24/7, pulling off miracles just to keep the lights on. He's begging, borrowing, making deals with the Turks, trying to patch up his navy with old fishing boats. He's in constant crisis mode. Meanwhile, what's his son, the heir, doing? He's in the palace courtyard practicing for jousting tournaments. You can just feel the tension building. It's the ultimate clash. The father who knows that survival is a desperate daily grind, versus the son who thinks greatness is just something you inherit. It is a recipe for absolute disaster. So, what happens when you have a restless, ambitious son who feels entitled to everything? The dad decides to give him a little test. In 1373, Emperor John sends his son Andronikos out to be the governor of a city called Salimbria. It's like giving your kid the keys to the company's most important branch office and saying, "All right, show me what you've got. Try not to mess this up." And what does Andronikos do? He doesn't just scratch the paint job, he drives the car directly off a cliff. Almost immediately. Within just a few months, he goes behind his dad's back, cuts a secret deal with the Genoese, who were major business rivals, promises them all sorts of benefits, and then declares himself the new co-emperor. Can you believe the audacity? He literally tried to stage a corporate takeover against his own father. So dad has to do what Byzantine emperors always did. He marches his army out there to deal with his son. He surrounds him and basically forces him to surrender. He makes him swear on a piece of the true cross one of the holiest relics in existence, that he'll be loyal. Round 1 goes to Dad. But does Andronikos learn his lesson? Does he say, "Okay, my mistake, I'll go back to jousting"? Absolutely not. Just 3 years later, in 1376, he does it again. This time, he goes even bigger. He gets troops from the Ottoman Sultan himself, the #1 enemy of the empire. The Sultan was more than happy to help, because he loved seeing his neighbors tear each other apart in a civil war. This time, it works. Andronikos and his borrowed army burst into Constantinople. They throw his father, John V, off the throne and into a prison cell. Andronikos puts the crown on his own head. He won. He actually did it. For exactly 3 years, the son who betrayed his father was the emperor of the Romans. And it's because of these 3 years that the most brutal act of revenge in history is about to happen. All right, everyone, you need to prepare yourself for this next part. This is where the story goes from a family feud to something out of a horror movie. You are not ready for this. So, for 3 years, the son is emperor, while the dad rots in a dungeon. But in 1379, the tables turn in the most dramatic way possible. The father, John V, gets out. He swallows his pride, sells off the priceless crown jewels to bankers in Venice, and uses the money to buy himself an army. An Ottoman army. Yes, he hires the exact same enemies his son used against him. He marches back into Constantinople and takes back his throne in a swift, ugly counter-coup. He's back in charge. The son's reign is over. Now, sit back and think about this. What would you do with the son who betrayed you not once, but twice, and threw you in a dungeon for 3 years? Banish him? Execute him? John V chose something so much worse, so twisted, it's hard to even comprehend. The chronicles say he summoned his son, Andronikos, to the palace. He promised him he would be safe. And the son, still arrogant, still clueless, strolls right in, probably still wearing his purple emperor slippers, thinking he's just going to get a slap on the wrist. He was wrong. What happened next wasn't a quick execution. That would have been too merciful. Instead, the emperor ordered his servants to take a common household item, vinegar. They were told to heat the vinegar until it was boiling, steaming hot. They grabbed the prince, his own son, and pinned him down. And then they ladled the scalding, boiling liquid directly into each of his eyes. I need you to let that sink in. He didn't just blind him. He cooked his son's eyes with boiling vinegar until the corneas clouded over, and he was completely and irreversibly blind. This is not an exaggeration. This is what the historical sources say happened. Why do something so specific, so gruesome? Because Byzantine law was crystal clear on this. A mutilated man could never, ever sit on the throne. No scars, no missing limbs, and absolutely no blindness. It was a political checkmate. With a kitchen ladle and some hot vinegar, the father hadn't just inflicted pain. He had surgically removed his son from the line of succession. He erased his future. One witness wrote that Andronikos screamed for 3 days straight. And he wasn't just screaming from the unimaginable physical pain, but from the horror of knowing his own father had just ended his life's ambition in the cruelest way possible. And what did the emperor do after this? He washed his hands and walked away. The ultimate act of cold, calculated revenge. So, you would think the story is over now, right? Game over. The son is blind. The father has the throne. What more could possibly happen? Wrong. If you think a little thing like being blinded by your own dad is going to stop Andronikos, you're mistaken. This guy's ambition was limitless. The blinding only solved half the problem. A prince who can't see can still have kids. He can still make alliances. He can still whisper conspiracies in dark corridors. And that's exactly what he did. In 1381, just 2 years after being horribly mutilated, Andronikos, squinting through his now useless milk-white eyes, slipped out of his house arrest. A blind man staged a prison break. And where do you think he went? You guessed it. He went straight back to his father's greatest enemies, the Turks. Can you imagine this scene? A blind prince shows up at the Sultan's court, and somehow talks Sultan Murad into giving him another army for one last try. This is the most insane comeback attempt in history. With a troop of elite Ottoman cavalry, this blind man sneaked across the Bosporus Strait, captured the fortress of Salimbria, the very place his dad first sent him as governor, and started minting his own coins, calling himself Emperor of the Romans. You honestly have to admire the sheer nerve. This man had no eyesight, no money, no powerful allies, except his father's mortal enemies, and yet he was still fighting for the crown. For 5 years, you had this unbelievable situation. A blind emperor ruling a small chunk of the country from behind fortress walls, while his aging father ruled the capital city. Think about that. The most bizarre family standoff in the history of the world. For 5 insane years, you had this stalemate. The blind son fighting his seeing eye father. It couldn't last forever. In 1385, the wheel of fortune turned one last time. The original emperor, the father, John V, finally died of old age. So you're thinking, okay, now is the blind son's chance to take over, right? Nope. It gets even more complicated. The throne didn't go to him. It went to his younger brother, Manuel. And suddenly, everyone turned on the blind prince. I mean everyone. His brother, his cousins, the bankers who funded the empire, even his old allies the Turks. They all got together and agreed on one thing. Andronikos, the blind man, was just too unpredictable, too risky, too much of a wild card to be left in any position of power. He had caused too much chaos. His own brother, the new emperor, surrounded him and offered him a deal. Give up your claim, go live in a monastery, and keep your mouth shut. Retire quietly. And what did Andronikos do? He basically laughed in his face. He'd already lost his eyes. What else could they possibly take from him? The answer came in the form of Ottoman janissaries, the most elite soldiers of the time. They stormed his fortress in Salimbria and dragged him out in chains. A historian from the time adds this one last savage detail. The soldiers who captured him taunted him endlessly, shouting things like, "Behold the genius prince who outwitted his own father," but then forgot to bribe his jailers. History doesn't tell us what he said back. We only know that he died in 1385 in a prison cell. He died technically still calling himself an emperor, but in reality, he was just a footnote in the story of other men's victories. What a tragic, unbelievable, and absolutely wild ride his life was. So, why should you care about this absolutely bonkers family feud from over 600 years ago? Because this story explains how an empire dies. It wasn't just about a father and a son hating each other. Every single time they fought, they were chipping away at the very foundation of the Byzantine Empire. They showed the world that the emperor wasn't some divine figure chosen by God. They showed that power could be stolen by your own son, or that your enemies could put you on the throne if the price was right. It completely destroyed the myth and the trust that held the empire together for 1,000 years. Think of it like a giant Jenga tower. Every civil war, every betrayal, was another block being pulled out, making the whole thing more and more unstable. And the horrific thing the father did to his son, mutilating him, blinding him, was a preview of what was coming. Within a couple of generations, the Ottomans would do the exact same thing to the entire empire. They would surround it, weaken it, and then snuff it out, methodically, and without any mercy. Just 68 years after Andronikos was blinded, Constantinople, the greatest city in the Christian world, fell to the Ottomans for good. The final emperor who died defending the walls, Constantine XI, was the great-nephew of Andronikos. The scars of this family were passed down through generations. The dynasty that once stretched from the Middle East to Europe limped into total destruction, partly because a father decided that the safest heir was one who would never be able to see the future he was fighting for. If you guys think this story is as absolutely wild as I do me a favor and smash that like button. Let's see if we can get this video to 1 million likes for the most insane father-son rivalry in the history of the world. Thanks for watching.